live long and prosper. So in this video series, I'm going to be talking through the social justice elements of every episode of the original series of Star Trek. The thing that inspired this project was actually a Fox News article which argued that Star Trek has in some way betrayed its traditional commitment to sort of political neutrality or middle ground by embracing progressive politics. In this series, we're going to see that Star Trek has always embraced progressive politics, and it's always been aspirational for social justice in various senses. I am taking a broad perspective on social justice here, so that may include multiple different types of social justice, whether that's racial, whether that's economic, whether that's religious, whether that's abilities, gender and sexuality, anything broadly considered. I will go through every episode. Some of the episodes I will interview fellow Trekkies and talk with them about it. And then below, in the descriptions, I will give you additional information about the episodes, particularly their original air date, who wrote the screenplay, and who directed that episode. I also want to dedicate this series to my dad, Michael Allen Zapkin. He was an OG Trekkie from back in the day, and it was watching the original series with him that I came to love Star Trek. In this video, we're going to talk about the episode Tomorrow is Yesterday. Now, this is not one of the best episodes of the original series. There's bits and pieces of social justice stuff here, so if you, like me, are watching the original series with a social justice lens in mind, this is not going to be one that really interests you. But it's also just not an especially good episode, full stop. Basically, the Enterprise gets flung back in time to around 1969. They get sent from across the galaxy to Earth in 1969 or so. They do hear Uhura picks up on communications that the first manned moonshot is going to occur. So we, of course, know that happened in 1969. I don't know if in 1967, when this episode aired, people necessarily knew that 1969 was going to be the date for the moon mission. But late 60s. The Enterprise is pretty badly damaged. They get spotted by the U.S. Air Force. And the U.S. Air Force sends up a fighter jet commanded by Captain John Christopher. The Enterprise tractor beams his ship, which is not structurally stable enough to hold up to the tractor beam, so they beam him aboard. The problem is he has now seen the Enterprise, he's now seen the inside of the Enterprise, and Kirk's just like, let's have a fucking tour. So there's no question of like, maybe we shouldn't let this guy see all of our crazy future space tech. And then Spock is like, we can't really send him back to Earth because he's seen all of our crazy future space tech. 1969 can't know about our crazy future space tech. So initially, Captain Christopher is like, I have a wife and kids that I'd really like to go back to. And Kirk's like, well, too bad. Sucks to your Asmar. Christopher is not super cool with that, but there's not much he can do. Then Spock comes back and he's like, I made an error. I looked it up. Captain John Christopher makes no important contribution to Earth history or galactic history, I guess. But his son, who hasn't yet been born, is the leader of the first manned mission to Venus, I think. Now that's actually really interesting because here the timeline for Star Trek is their timeline for the latter half of the 20th century is a bit odd here. If this is 1969 and Captain Christopher's son, who's going to lead the first manned mission to Venus, has not yet been born, that means at the very earliest, he's born 1970. If he's born in 1970, he would be coming of age to potentially, at the very earliest, he might be leading this manned mission to Venus, maybe, say, around 25. So that's 1995. The problem with that is we know from the episode Space Seed, which actually I don't think has happened yet. I think it's, let me just check that for just a second. I think it's, 3 episodes. Sorry, three episodes from now, in the episode Space Seed, we find out that the 1990s was characterized by the eugenics wars, where large portions of the population were enslaved. There's massive war. This leads into World War III, I think. I think World War III is connected to the eugenics wars in the vague and somewhat shifting and inconsistent timeline the original series sets out for the latter portion of the 20th century. So it seems somewhat unlikely that Captain John Christopher's as yet unborn son would be leading that mission to Venus. On the other hand, Star Trek, I've said this before, Star Trek had such high hopes for us. Such high hopes for where we would be by the 1990s and 2000s. And, in some ways, we must be such a disappointment to them. But, anyway, back to the plot summary. So Spock is like, well, Captain Christopher's unborn son is actually super, super important, so we need to get him back. But we can't have people knowing about the Enterprise. So Kirk and Sulu go down to this base. Captain Christopher draws them a map, basically, and they go down to the photography section of the records office to steal all of the tapes that have caught anything about the Enterprise. Kirk gets captured. Sulu manages to beam back up. They also have to beam up an Air Force military police officer. So now they've got 2 people that they have to figure out some way of returning. They have to rescue Kirk, etc., etc. So they go, they do that. Scotty fixes the engines, and they're like, we can travel forward in time basically by slingshotting around the sun. And as we do that, we will beam Captain Christopher back into his own body on his airplane before we've destroyed it. Then the whole encounter with the Enterprise will never have occurred. We'll beam the air police guy back into his body before he ever encountered Kirk and Sulu, and nobody will remember a thing. And then we will be flung back into the future. We will stop the engines at the right moment and be back in our own time, maybe. So that's what happens. Now again, there's not really much here in terms of social justice. There's a lot of bits and pieces of things that are potentially social justice-y, but nothing that really crystallizes as a particular concern here. So for instance, Captain Christopher is amazed that there are female crew members on the Enterprise. And he and Kirk are walking through the hallway, and a female crew member walks by and is like, "Good morning, Captain." And they place him I don't know, sexy 60s music or whatever as she walks by. And Christopher's like, I don't know, he like watches her walk past or something. You know, we got that element. Kirk's got his first sort of issue with his computer, which has been reconfigured to have a female personality. It calls him dear. Spock says that it giggles, etc., etc. And so there's that whole like, oh, we don't want a female computer, even though actually the computers on the Enterprise were voiced by Majel Barrett, who later became Majel Roddenberry, or Majel Barrett Roddenberry. I can't remember. I think it's hyphenated. So the default voice of the computer was done by a female actor, but the fact that the computer in Kirk's room calls him dear and stuff is apparently quite problematic. So there's like some not necessarily fantastic gender politics stuff, but I don't think there's a ton in this episode related to that. The fact that Sulu is the one chosen to beam down with Kirk to a secret U.S. military installation in 1969 or so was potentially a bad strategy because, I mean, Sulu is Japanese American. Of course, George Takei is Japanese American, but Sulu, the character, also is as well. He was born in San Francisco. But World War II was not that long ago when the Japanese were the big enemy. The Korean War was not that long ago, and the Vietnam War was currently going on at the time. So having someone of Asian descent breaking into, effectively, I don't know why I put scare quotes around it, but having someone of Asian descent breaking into a top secret U.S. military facility, not the most tactful in terms of the time period and what was going on in terms of military conflict at the time. So you've got that element. You've got a lot of just bits and pieces of small things that don't add up to much social justice concern here. Again, I think possibly there's an argument to be made that the most social justice related thing is Star Trek's ambition for us. Like the idea that the generation born in the late 60s, early 70s would be starting galactic travel, would be starting manned exploration of other planets. There's such a great ambition, and we kind of just lost interest as a society in the US. We kind of lost interest in space exploration, and it's only recently that we've started sort of coming back around to it. The other thing, and this is not a social justice thing, but this is another problem with the episode. This is, as far as I can remember, the only time in the entire, maybe the entire franchise, but I can't say that definitively, the entire original series at the very least, in which they beam someone into their own body. Because as they're sort of going backwards through time, they beam Captain Christopher into his existing body in his fighter jet. They beam the air police sergeant into his body in the base, and they're just fine. Like they don't have any of the memories of what occurred, but they're just like, it's fine. Normally, you can't transport someone into matter that otherwise exists. So that's a huge problem. It doesn't really make any sense. Again, this is not a fantastic episode, either from a social justice or just from a storytelling perspective.